Welcome to News from the Heart. I'm Heather George, and I'm sitting with my beloved teacher and guru, Swami Chetanananda. And hopefully most of you have found us on our blog spot or looked at the website to understand a little bit about our spiritual practice and the philosophies and teachings that Swamiji offers and has been offering for well over 40 years. And a word that comes up and has come up for many years in my practice and actually partly led me to Swamiji is the fact that we have a Tantric philosophy in our practice. And what a loaded word this is in our culture, for sure. I can say that before I met Swamiji, I started looking at the lineages, the Tantric lineages, and fascinated with the practices and the teachings, and incessantly was bombarded by a perspective that's held in this country, especially, or in our culture, that my practice is founded in sex. And, you know, in the beginning of my bodywork practice, I was doing Tantric yoga, and the phone calls and emails that I often got were shocking to me, that they thought that I was providing literally sex services. But anyways, I would love to talk to you a little bit about how this has come about, why Tantra is so closely related to sex in our culture and in most people's minds and perceptions. Tell me about Tantric Sex, Swamiji.
First of all, Heather, Tantra has nothing to do with sex. The Tantric tradition is a very particular view of the world that stands in contrast in South Asia to the more dualistic perspectives which are represented by the Vedas and some of the other traditions there. Tantric means everything is one thing, and that one thing is creative energy. In America, so many people who have sought a spiritual path have sought a spiritual path in large measure because the perspectives of the traditional Christian and Jewish communities in which most of us grew up, you know, were not even slightly adequate to our need for understanding the world we were navigating. And we experienced very profoundly that their rules and regulations had nothing to do with anything, especially with us. You know, having grown up a Catholic, can you imagine how annoying it was to me to know that I was being spoken to, supposedly taught, the rules about sex by people who had never been there and knew absolutely nothing about it. You know, and I was taught the rules about sex by men who clearly had not mastered the position that they were espousing. Most of us turned away. I know personally I turned away from Christianity, you know, in large part because I was not capable of suppressing my own sexuality, and I did not feel one shred of guilt about that lack of capacity.
They wanted me to feel bad, guilty, and wrong for these things.
Right, and I mean, how could anything that make me feel so good be so bad? So.
They'd have an answer for that.
Sure they would. The devil made me feel it. But I didn't buy into that, you know, because that feeling, that good feeling that I had, you know, was really a stepping stone, a part of the pathway or the staircase to the discovery, the awakening of love in my heart. And further on, the ultimate recognition of unconditional love as the source of life itself.
I feel like you're almost saying that you're not denying your sexual nature led you away from Christianity and towards Tantra. So
okay, so then let's talk about let's talk about that, because here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the vast majority of Americans who think they know about Tantra from the perspective of rejecting that, the traditional ideas about the limitations of our sexuality and our sexual expression. They know nothing about Tantra otherwise. How many people use the word chi in, around you, and now that you've been studying the whole principle of chi, its fundamental power and the sophistication of its expression, what would you say most people know about the word chi?
Yeah, I could write a book.
So,
for sure.
So here's the thing. The Tantric tradition has the perspective, and this Tantric tradition arises not just in India. The fact is that both the Vedas and the Tantras existed in some different form early, probably tens of thousands of years ago, and because of their fundamental strength and resilience and power have survived even to this minute, although in different and sometimes diminished forms.
Including the one being taught in the West?
The one being taught in the West, look, there are maybe half a dozen people in the West who've had Tantric teachers who had any real power and real understanding. And, most of those people, including myself, don't teach the sexual aspects of Tantric practice. Because, most Americans don't want to be responsible for that. They don't want to handle the responsibility of that power. And, so I'll say this. I have trained and received empowerments in esoteric practices of Tibetan Buddhism in two practice traditions, the Chakra Samvara and Vajrakilaya. I have studied carefully, the ritual practices, the intimate ritual practices of, I should say, the ritual practices involving intimate contact in esoteric Shaivism. And I can say this, the whole notion of Tantric sexuality as a, pathway towards some kind of expanded ascetic sensibility is not very accurate. Tantric sex, sexual practice in Tantra is to ultimately recognize that the purpose of being alive is joy, and that joy is the fundamental quality of unconditional love. That joy encompasses and embraces every form of behavior and every form of human, every form of every living being on the face of the planet. It brings us to a place where, we recognize that our body, rather than being the focal point of temptation, is, our bodies are curtains of light, condensations of that divine creative energy, never different or separate from it. Our bodies are to be respected and to cultivate and to be cultivated, and all other bodies and all of their motions are to be same. So for that, we can connect to our sexual energy in our body, because sexuality is, everybody has it. It's essential to human beings. It is, in my view, the suppression of that sexuality is a source of disease. I'm saying, if you didn't hear it, celibacy is wrong and unhealthy.
In all cases?
In all cases, but not for all times.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like there's been times where
it was appropriate for you not to be engaged in sexual activity. That's perfect. That's not celibacy. That is recognizing that in this moment you don't have the energy available to you to participate in that. But it's not diminished at all. So, there's no rule book that says do this, don't do that, this, that, it's you have to really cultivate self-awareness and self-knowledge. Intimate contact in tantric ritual is a very small, very specific dimension of tantric practice and the tantric universe. It is tiny.
And it's never isolated.
Never isolated, and it has a very specific function. We don't need to have tantric, quote, tantric sex in order to feel joy. We need only to connect to the 3 dimensions of creative energy that are expressed as and through the body. We need to awaken that energy and make contact with the main centers in which that energy resides. And if we constantly, through the agency of breath, connect to the energy centers in the body, we will dissolve tensions and awaken within ourselves the experience of joy that is indestructible and unconditional love, which embraces all of humanity as it dissolves our suffering and the suffering of others and finishes all the tensions that we have carried with us into this world. For the most part, the way tantric sex is practiced and expressed, especially in the West today, all that does is cause suffering.
Why?
Because people open channels, create connections which they have no intention ever of being actually responsible for, and, continuously cultivating. I'll say this. I was celibate for a very small period of time in my life. After I took sannyas, for a couple of years, before I was informed by a devotee of Muktananda that nobody in Siddha Yoga was actually celibate. At that point, I publicly, and that was in 1980, I publicly stood up and said, I'm not that. I'm not doing that, and whatever I do, I will be transparent about. If we engage in an intimate relationship, we have to be willing to take responsibility for the cultivation of that connection. And whether we are, whatever our gender orientation is, and however we express ourselves in that moment of intimate contact. And generally, tantric ritual is conceived of as an intimate interaction between a man and a woman. However that's done, we are engaging in that practice for self-cultivation and for the cultivation of a connection with another person, which requires of us, that we are permanently respectful of that person, permanently concerned for their welfare, and permanently and committed to contributing to their well-being. And, the way it is practiced in the United States, it's like just a chainsaw. Let's go out and rip, zip, have a wild time, and, we don't care who falls in and falls out. The reason why intimate contact in tantric ritual was considered secret is because people who were not seriously committed to practicing and capable of being responsible for long-term cultivation of connections should not have powerful tools to play with.
I would love to think that, you know, we can have the same conversation about just the word yoga in general in this culture that we just had about tantric sex. And my optimistic side wants to believe that the fact that the concepts, however misconstrued they are here, have opened doorways to a conversation, dialogue, or relationship with authentic yoga and authentic tantra.
I think they have. I think that the issue is it is a much longer road than any of us would like to think it is. And what we hope is that going forward, generations in the future, you know, that contact with yoga and contact with the extraordinary understanding of a human being that is the tantric tradition is an embodiment of, will be a meaningful lighthouse to help human beings navigate through what I believe are some very dark times that are coming toward us.
That you've become a master of, and it's so amazing. And truly 5 or 6 people in this country, if that, have truly studied this amazing art form. So let's push sex aside, give Tantra the center stage.
The very simplest way to think of this is, Abhinavagupta in the 10th century writes a work called Tantra Loka, which is a compendium of the philosophical and practical perspective of tantric practitioners. Of the 36 volumes that make up the Tantra Loka, one, the 29th, the smallest volume, is dedicated to the topic of intimate contact in tantric ritual, and half of that, or less, of that volume actually is dedicated to the practice of it, and the larger bulk of that volume is dedicated to the process of initiation.
If you want to hear what the other books of the Tantra Loka are about, please visit the Movement Center, our website, or our center, Swamiji and Professor Sanderson, who you've worked with for so long, and we have literally the experts in these fields. Thank you for joining us on News from the Heart again, and we'll see you again in another episode.